I never intended to be at the hotel bar that night. I'm not a woman who seeks out excitement or pushes the boundaries of her quiet, orderly life. But there I was, sipping a glass of white wine, surrounded by the hum of voices and clinking glasses, the air thick with the faint scent of perfume and cologne. I was there because my friends had insisted, a hen party for Marjorie, who was somehow getting married again at 73. Live a little, Donna, they had said, practically dragging me out of my comfortable house and into a world of sequins and champagne. And while they danced and laughed in a private booth on the other side of the bar, I had found my way here, to a quieter corner, where I could nurse my drink and take in the spectacle from a safe distance. I hadn't noticed him at first. He was just another figure in the sea of strangers, another guest in a hotel bustling with activity. But then he approached the bar, a few seats away from mine, and ordered a drink in a voice so smooth it cut through the noise. I glanced at him out of habit, and that was the moment everything shifted. He was younger than me, decades younger, in fact, with dark, unruly hair and a confidence that seemed to radiate from him. His suit was sharp but slightly undone, the top button of his shirt left open as though he didn't care about perfection. He looked over and caught my eye, and instead of looking away like most people would, he smiled. I froze, my hand tightening around the stem of my glass. Men like him didn't notice women like me, especially not women in their 70s, wearing a modest dress and clutching their handbags like a security blanket. My first instinct was to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen him, but something about the warmth in his expression stopped me. Evening, he said, his voice low and inviting. You look like you're enjoying the quieter side of things. I blinked, caught off guard. Oh, yes. I suppose I am. His smile widened. Mind if I join you? I should have said no. I should have excused myself, gone back to my friends, and let the moment pass. But instead, I nodded, my heart fluttering in a way that felt both thrilling and absurd. He slid onto the stool beside me, his presence commanding but not overwhelming, and introduced himself. I'm Ethan, he said, extending a hand. Donna, I replied, shaking it tentatively. His grip was firm but not forceful, his hand warm against mine. What brings you here tonight, Donna? He asked, leaning slightly closer. It's a hen do, I said, feeling a flush creep up my neck. For a friend. He chuckled, a rich, genuine sound that made my chest tighten. And yet here you are, sitting alone at the bar. I suppose I'm not much for parties, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Our conversation flowed more easily than I expected. Ethan was charming but not arrogant, attentive without being overbearing. He asked about my life, my interests, even my thoughts on the wine I was drinking. And though I was hesitant at first, I found myself opening up in a way I hadn't in years. There was something about him, something disarming and genuine, that made me feel seen. You have a lovely laugh, he said at one point, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I blushed, my nerves flaring. I'm sure I don't laugh that much. You should, he said softly. It suits you. As the night wore on, I became acutely aware of the way he looked at me, not with pity or amusement, but with a kind of curiosity and appreciation that made my pulse race. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, as though some long-dormant part of me had been awakened. But beneath the exhilaration was a steady hum of doubt. What was I doing? I was a married woman, for goodness sake. A faithful wife for over 4 decades. What would David think if he saw me here, talking to this handsome stranger like a schoolgirl with a crush? I glanced at the clock above the bar, my heart sinking as I realized how late it had gotten. I should go, I said, my voice tinged with regret. Ethan looked at me, his expression unreadable. Are you sure? The night's still young. I'm afraid I'm not, I said, forcing a smile. It's been lovely talking to you, Ethan. Likewise, he said, his voice warm. But as I stood to leave, he reached out, his fingers brushing my arm. Donna, would you like to join me for a nightcap? No pressure, of course. For a moment, I stood frozen, the weight of his question pressing down on me. Every rational part of me screamed to say no, to walk away and return to the safety of my life. But there was another part of me, a part that longed to feel alive, to break free from the routine and the quiet ache of unmet dreams. Yes, I heard myself say, my voice barely audible. I'd like that. We left the bar together, my heart pounding in my chest as we stepped into the quiet hallway. I told myself it was just a drink, just a conversation. But deep down, I knew this was something more, something I hadn't felt in years and wasn't sure I deserved. And as we entered his suite, the city lights stretching out below us, I realized I wasn't ready to let it go. The suite was as luxurious as I imagined a place like his would be, modern, spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city. Ethan poured us drinks from a crystal decanter, his movements fluid and unhurried, while I stood near the window, my nerves buzzing. The lights below seemed to stretch endlessly, a glittering reminder of how far I was from the life I had built with David. Here, Ethan said, handing me a glass of something amber-colored. His fingers brushed mine, sending a small jolt up my arm. Thank you, I murmured, taking a cautious sip. The liquid was smooth and warm, its heat spreading through me like courage. I needed it. We talked for a while, sitting on the plush sofa that overlooked the city. Ethan asked questions that felt disarmingly personal but not intrusive, and I found myself answering with an honesty that surprised me. I told him about David, about our quiet life in the suburbs, about the years we had spent hoping for children that never came. I spoke of the ache that had settled in my chest as the years passed, of the way it felt to let go of that dream. Ethan listened intently, his gaze never leaving mine. That sounds incredibly lonely, he said softly. I looked away, embarrassed by the tears that pricked at my eyes. It's not all bad. David's a good man. He's kind, reliable. But sometimes, I trailed off, unsure of how to articulate the emptiness that had grown between us. Sometimes you feel like something's missing, Ethan finished for me. I nodded, my throat tight. Yes. The next moments unfolded with a kind of inevitability that both terrified and thrilled me. Ethan reached out, his hand brushing a strand of hair from my face. You're an incredible woman, Donna, he said, his voice low and steady. I don't think you even realize it. I froze, my heart pounding as he leaned closer. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, as though giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The longing I had buried for so many years came rushing to the surface, overwhelming my doubts and fears. What followed was both exhilarating and surreal, a night that felt like stepping into someone else's life. Ethan's touch was gentle but insistent, his presence commanding yet comforting. For the first time in decades, I felt truly seen, truly desired. It was intoxicating, and I let myself be carried away by it. When I woke the next morning, the reality of what I had done hit me like a wave. Ethan was still asleep beside me, his features relaxed in the early morning light. I watched him for a moment, marveling at how different he looked, less composed, more vulnerable. Then guilt crashed over me, sharp and unrelenting. What had I done? How could I face David after this? The man who had stood by me through everything, the failed treatments, the endless doctor's visits, the quiet grief of a future we'd never have. I thought of his kind smile, his steady presence, and the weight of my betrayal became unbearable. I slipped out of bed quietly, gathering my clothes and dressing in the bathroom. When I returned to the bedroom, Ethan was awake, propped up on one elbow, watching me. Leaving so soon? He asked, his voice laced with amusement. I need to get back, I said, avoiding his gaze. My friends are expecting me. He studied me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Donna, he said gently. You don't have to regret this. But I already did. The ride home was a blur. My friends chattered excitedly about the weekend, their laughter filling the car as we left the city behind. I nodded and smiled where appropriate, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the night and the decision I now had to live with. When I walked through the door of our house later that evening, David was in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared dinner. The sight of him, so familiar and comforting, brought tears to my eyes. He looked up and smiled, his face lighting up in a way that made my chest ache. "You're back," he said, crossing the room to kiss my cheek. "How was the weekend?" "It was nice," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Marjorie had a wonderful time." He nodded, returning to the stove. "I'm glad. You deserve to have fun now and then." His words were kind, unassuming, and they only deepened my guilt. I spent the evening watching him, marveling at the small details I had long taken for granted, the way he hummed under his breath, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. How could I have risked all of this for one fleeting moment of passion? The days that followed were a strange mix of relief and tension. I threw myself into the routines of our life, determined to put the affair behind me. But the memory of Ethan lingered, surfacing at the most inconvenient times, a song on the radio, a passing glance at a hotel in town. I told myself it was over, that it had meant nothing. But deep down, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Then, a few weeks later, everything changed. It started with small signs: fatigue, nausea, a strange heaviness in my chest. At first, I dismissed them as stress or the flu. But when the symptoms persisted, I found myself standing in the pharmacy aisle, staring at a pregnancy test with a mix of hope and dread. I hadn't taken one in years. After countless disappointments, I had given up on the idea of motherhood entirely. The word pregnant echoed in my mind like a bell, growing louder with each repetition. I sat on the cold bathroom floor, clutching the test as though it might dissolve in my trembling hands. At 71, I had long since accepted that motherhood wasn't in the cards for me. I had grieved the loss of that dream years ago, or so I thought. But now, staring at this undeniable proof, I wasn't sure what I felt: joy, guilt, fear, or all three tangled together in a knot I couldn't unravel. I spent the next few days in a haze, my thoughts racing with possibilities and consequences. David noticed my distraction. Of course, he always noticed when something was off. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked one evening as we sat in the living room. He was reading the newspaper, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. "You've been quiet since you got back from the city." "I'm fine," I said too quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a little tired, that's all." He studied me for a moment, his expression softening. "You've been doing too much. You need to rest." His concern only deepened my guilt. David was a good man, gentle, patient, the kind of husband most women dreamed of. And yet, I had betrayed him. Now, I carried the evidence of that betrayal, hidden beneath my skin. I avoided the doctor at first, unwilling to face the reality of my situation. But as the days turned into weeks, the symptoms became impossible to ignore. The fatigue grew heavier, the nausea more persistent, and I began to feel a faint fluttering in my abdomen, a life stirring within me. When I finally made the appointment, I was both terrified and relieved. The doctor, a kind woman in her 40s, raised an eyebrow when I explained why I was there. "Pregnancy at your age is extremely rare," she said gently, though her tone carried a note of disbelief. "But not impossible. Let's run some tests and take a look." The ultrasound was surreal. I lay on the table, the cool gel on my stomach, staring at the screen as the doctor moved the wand. And then, there it was, a tiny heartbeat, steady and strong. Tears welled in my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them. The doctor smiled, handing me a tissue. "Congratulations," she said. "It looks like you're about 8 weeks along." 8 weeks. The timeline confirmed what I already knew. This child wasn't David's. It was Ethan's. I left the doctor's office in a daze, clutching the ultrasound photo like a lifeline. The sight of that tiny heartbeat had filled me with a fierce, protective love I hadn't expected. But it also brought with it a tidal wave of questions. What would I tell David? How would he react? And what about Ethan? Did he have a right to know, or was it better to leave him in the dark? The guilt weighed heavier with each passing day. I wanted to be honest with David, to share the truth of what had happened. But every time I opened my mouth to tell him, the words caught in my throat. He had endured so much with me already, the heartbreak of infertility, the quiet acceptance of a life without children. How could I burden him with this? How could I tell him that the one thing we had longed for had come from another man? The decision to contact Ethan came almost impulsively. One evening, as I sat alone in the bedroom, staring at the ultrasound photo, I found myself reaching for my phone. I still had his number saved, though I had never expected to use it. My fingers hovered over the screen, my heart pounding as I debated what to say. Finally, I typed out a simple message, "Ethan, it's Donna. Can we talk?" He replied almost immediately. "Of course. Everything all right?" "Not really," I wrote back. "I need to see you. Can you meet me?" We met at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from where anyone might recognize me. Ethan arrived first, looking just as polished and confident as I remembered. But when he saw me, his expression softened, concern flickering in his eyes. "Donna," he said warmly, standing to pull out my chair. "It's good to see you." I forced a smile, sitting across from him. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around the cup of tea he had ordered for me. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," he said, his tone steady. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Ethan. I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air, heavy and unspoken, for a long moment. His eyes widened, his usually composed demeanor faltering. "Pregnant," he repeated, as though testing the word on his tongue. "With my child?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yes. It happened that night, after the bar. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't even think it was possible at my age." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "This is a lot." "I know," I said quickly. "I don't expect anything from you. I just thought you deserved to know." He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "And your husband? Does he know?" "No," I said, the shame in my voice unmistakable. "I haven't told him yet. I don't know how to." Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing mine. "Donna, this is complicated. But whatever happens, I want to be here for you. For the child." His words brought a strange mix of relief and fear. I had thought I wanted to handle this alone, to keep the secret buried. But now, with Ethan's support, a new possibility emerged, a way forward that might not be as impossible as I had imagined. As I left the cafe, my thoughts swirled with uncertainty. Telling David the truth felt like an insurmountable challenge, but I couldn't avoid it forever. The life growing inside me deserved honesty, even if it meant risking everything. The days that followed my meeting with Ethan were some of the most agonizing of my life. The weight of the secret bore down on me with relentless intensity, a quiet pressure that seeped into every moment of my waking life. David, ever attentive, noticed my distracted state, his gentle questions only deepening my guilt. "You've been so quiet lately," he said one evening as we sat together in the living room. The fireplace crackled softly, casting a warm glow across the room. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But the lie was beginning to take its toll. Every time I looked at David, the guilt twisted in my chest, a sharp reminder of what I had done. And yet, beneath that guilt was another emotion, something softer, more complicated. Hope. The life growing inside me felt like a miracle, an impossible gift that I hadn't dared to dream of. But how could I celebrate that miracle when its very existence threatened to shatter the life we had built? I spent hours rehearsing the conversation in my mind, imagining every possible reaction David might have. Anger, disbelief, heartbreak, I braced myself for it all. But nothing could prepare me for the reality of actually saying the words. Still, I knew I couldn't wait much longer. The weeks were slipping by, and the truth would only grow harder to conceal. One evening, after dinner, I finally summoned the courage to speak. David was in the kitchen, washing dishes with his usual methodical precision. I stood in the doorway, my hands clenched at my sides, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "David," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Can we talk?" He looked up, concern flickering across his face. "Of course," he said, drying his hands. "What's on your mind?" I led him to the living room, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me. We sat across from each other, the silence stretching unbearably as I searched for the right words. Finally, I took a deep breath, my hands shaking in my lap. "There's something I need to tell you," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something complicated." David leaned forward, his expression steady but wary. "Okay." I hesitated, the enormity of the truth threatening to choke me. But there was no going back now. "I'm pregnant," I said, the words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. David's eyes widened, shock flickering across his face. "You're what?" "Pregnant," I repeated, my voice breaking. "I know it's hard to believe. I didn't think it was possible either. But it's true." For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze searching mine. Then, slowly, he reached out and took my hands in his. "Donna, this is incredible. After all these years, he stopped, his voice catching. "We're going to have a child?" Tears welled in my eyes, spilling over before I could stop them. His joy, his unguarded happiness, made what I had to say next almost unbearable. "David," I whispered, my voice trembling. "There's more." His smile faltered, confusion creeping into his expression. "What is it?" I pulled my hands away, unable to meet his gaze. "The baby, it's not yours." The words hit him like a physical blow. He leaned back, his face pale, his jaw tightening as he processed what I had said. "Not mine," he repeated, his voice hollow. My voice broke, and I forced myself to continue. "It happened when I was in the city. It was one night, and I didn't. I never meant for this to happen. I'm so sorry, David." The silence that followed was deafening. David stared at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "You had an affair," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Yes," I admitted, my chest heaving with sobs. "It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. But this baby... David, it's a miracle. I don't know what to do." For a long moment, he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy with emotion. "Donna, I don't know if I can process this right now. The woman I've loved for 40 years, how could you do this?" "I don't have an excuse," I said, my voice breaking. "I've been so lost, so full of doubt. But that doesn't make it right. I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for that." He stood abruptly, pacing the room as though trying to escape the weight of the moment. "And now you're pregnant," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "After all those years of trying, of hoping, it happens now?" I flinched at his words, the truth of them cutting deeply. "I don't expect you to forgive me," I said quietly. "But I needed to tell you the truth. You deserve to know." David stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping as the anger seemed to drain from him. "I don't know what to feel right now," he admitted, his voice raw. "This is too much." "I understand," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Take whatever time you need." He nodded, his gaze distant, before retreating to the bedroom without another word. I stayed on the couch, staring at the ultrasound photo in my hands, my heart heavy with regret and uncertainty. I had told the truth, but at what cost? The days that followed were tense and silent. David avoided me, retreating into himself as he grappled with the revelation. I gave him space, unsure of how to bridge the widening chasm between us. At night, I lay awake, my hand resting on my stomach, wondering what kind of life I could offer this child if David decided he couldn't forgive me. Then, one evening, David emerged from the bedroom and sat beside me on the couch. His face was drawn, his eyes weary, but there was a quiet resolve in his expression. "I need time," he said simply. "But I won't abandon you." And I won't abandon this child. Whatever happens between us, they deserve a chance. His words broke something open in me, a flood of relief and sorrow that left me sobbing in his arms. We weren't healed, not by a long shot. But it was a start. The days after David's quiet promise were filled with a tentative, fragile peace. We didn't talk much, but his presence in the house felt like an unspoken reassurance. He was here, and that meant something. But the space between us was undeniable, a gulf carved by my betrayal and the weight of what lay ahead. I threw myself into preparing for the baby, not because it felt easy, but because it felt necessary. The nursery, once an empty room I couldn't bear to enter, was slowly transformed into a warm, inviting space. I chose soft yellows and greens, colors that spoke of new beginnings. David didn't join me in the process, but I noticed him lingering in the doorway sometimes, his expression distant but thoughtful. One evening, as I folded tiny onesies and placed them in a drawer, he spoke from the doorway, startling me. "Do you think it's a boy or a girl?" I looked up, my heart catching at the softness in his voice. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I've been thinking about names." "Me too," he said, stepping into the room. "What about something timeless? Like Grace, if it's a girl?" The simplicity of the moment brought tears to my eyes. "Grace," I repeated, my voice trembling. "It's perfect." Slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild. It wasn't easy. There were days when the tension between us felt almost unbearable, when the wounds of my betrayal seemed too raw to move past. But there were also moments of connection, small but significant, that reminded me of the love we had shared for so many years. One such moment came during a doctor's appointment. David insisted on accompanying me, his first active step toward embracing the reality of the pregnancy. As the technician moved the ultrasound wand across my belly, the sound of the baby's heartbeat filled the room, a steady, rhythmic reminder of the life we had created, however complicated its origin. David reached for my hand, his grip firm but trembling. "That's incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is," I agreed, tears streaming down my face. I didn't think I'd ever hear that sound. Ethan stayed in the background during this time, honoring my request to keep his involvement minimal. He reached out occasionally to check on me, his messages brief but supportive. I appreciated his restraint, even as I grappled with the knowledge that this child was his. It was a delicate balance, one I wasn't sure I could maintain forever. But for now, it was enough. As my belly grew, so did David's involvement. He began joining me for walks, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture that felt both protective and hesitant. We talked about the baby, about our hopes and fears, about the kind of parents we wanted to be. Those conversations, though tinged with uncertainty, became a bridge between us, a way to reconnect through the shared wonder of what was to come. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, David spoke the words I had been longing to hear. "I'm trying to forgive you, Donna," he said quietly. "It's not easy, but I want to. For us. For the baby." His honesty broke something open in me, a flood of gratitude and love that left me sobbing in his arms. "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." As the due date approached, the tension that had defined the past months began to lift. We attended birthing classes together, laughed over baby name debates, and shared quiet moments of anticipation that felt like glimpses of our old selves. It wasn't perfect, there were still unspoken wounds, unresolved feelings, but it was progress. The night the baby arrived was chaotic and beautiful. My water broke in the early hours of the morning, and David sprang into action, his calm efficiency grounding me as we rushed to the hospital. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination, punctuated by David's steady voice and the warmth of his hand in mine. When the baby finally arrived, a healthy, squalling little girl, we both wept openly. David held her first, his tears falling onto her tiny face as he whispered her name, Grace. Watching him cradle her, his expression a mix of awe and love, I felt a profound sense of hope. This child, born from a moment of weakness, had become a symbol of something greater, a chance to heal, to grow, to begin again. In the days that followed, our home was filled with the sounds of new life, soft cries, tiny coos, the rustle of blankets as Grace settled into her crib. David was a natural with her, his tenderness and patience shining in ways that reminded me why I had fallen in love with him all those years ago. Our relationship wasn't fully healed, it might never be, but Grace had given us something to hold on to, something to build toward. And in the quiet moments, as we marveled at the tiny miracle in our arms, I allowed myself to believe that we could find our way back to each other. One evening, as I rocked Grace to sleep, David joined me in the nursery, his expression soft. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low. "This baby, she's ours, Donna. No matter what happened before, she's ours." Tears filled my eyes as I nodded, overwhelmed by the depth of his love. "Yes," I whispered. "She's ours." As the weeks turned into months, I found myself letting go of the guilt and shame that had consumed me. Grace wasn't just a reminder of my mistakes, she was a testament to the resilience of love, to the possibility of redemption. And though our journey was far from over, I knew one thing for certain, we would face it together. If you've enjoyed my story, please leave your comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, where your support means the world to me. I look forward to bringing you more stories that inspires growth, joy, and purpose. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.